creepy primary school teacher.
When I was in grade 6, I think I was 11 at the time, I briefly went to a school in a town we had just moved to and lived in for only a few months. My normal grade 6 teacher didn't like me very much because I used to chat in class, and she would often send me to the grade 2 class to do my work. The grade 2 teacher, an old man who we'll call Mr. Jackson, was always super nice to me, but weirdly nice, and on recess and lunch would loiter around where me and my friends would sit. Anyways, one day this guy added me on MSN and we started talking every day. He said he was 16 and lived only a few hours away in the next big city. It was so long ago now that I can't remember where he said he got my email address from, but I was young and stupid, so probably thought nothing of it at the time. We still spoke for a couple of years, even after I had moved to the other side of the country. There were many times he would talk about sexual things, and I would just brush it off because I didn't really understand that sort of stuff. Until one day when I was 15, he sent me a message saying that he heard that my favorite teacher from my old school, Mr. Jackson, was sick. I only went to that school for a term, and I had definitely never mentioned any teachers' names or even what school it was that I went to. It was then I realized that the guy who I'd been talking to for years was this old man who had most likely gotten my email address from snooping around and reading notes between friends and I, or eavesdropping when he was always hanging around. This was about 11 years ago now, so I don't even know if he's still alive or not anymore. But if he is, I hope he's not still teaching, and definitely let's not meet again.
Send nudes now.
A few years ago, a random guy contacted me on Instagram. The guy was nice enough, and eventually he sent me his number. We started talking on the phone, but from the get-go he seemed a little off. He started getting angry if I didn't pick up the phone. Eventually I blocked him, but suddenly I'd be getting calls from a different number. It was always him. I blocked around 4 numbers before the calls stopped. Then, a few months later, he messaged me on Instagram from a new account. In the message, he basically stated that either I send him nude images of myself with slut written all over my body, or he would send my nudes to my family, work, and friends. I didn't understand what he meant by saying he'd send my nudes, because I knew he didn't have any of me. I ignored the message. An hour later, he sent me an image. He had found a girl who looked very similar to me, and honestly, it was just because I knew I never took any pictures that the woman was definitely not me. I reverse image searched the photo and found the actual woman in the pictures, but still I was scared. He could send out this woman's image and say it's me. And while I could message everyone and let them know it isn't me, I'm 100% sure not everyone would believe me and think I'm covering up the fact that I sent images to strangers online. My family is pretty conservative at best. I go onto this man's profile, and I remember a cold sweat coming over me as I saw that the people he followed were all the people I follow. Basically everyone I know. I didn't know what to do except message the guy back with a threat to go to the police. He deleted the messages he sent to me, and I deleted my Instagram account and instead began using my personal account, which is now set to private. On my account, I also blocked the man's profile. I just hope he never finds me again. Internet is a dangerous place. Creepy internet nude hunter. Let's not meet again.
Ex's Ex Found Me.
Me and my ex broke up about a year ago, and it got very messy. I was receiving DMs, text, and Snapchats from what seemed like everyone from her hometown. I got everything from calling me names to death threats. I ended up having to block about 10 people from 3 different sources of social media, but that's besides the point. The worst threats I received was from her recent ex. One read, "Oh, you hurt my girl? It's over for you. I know what town you live in. I will find you, and when I do, even your parents won't be able to recognize your body." He also sent me several others explaining the ways he would torture me. I just ended up blocking him, along with everyone else, and moved on with my life. Well, today, getting close to our 1 year of breaking up, me and my ex have started to talk again on okay terms, and everything seemed fine. I go about my day and walk over to this popular deli to grab a bite to eat. I end up passing a friend of mine along the way. They shout my name from across the street and head over. We talk for a bit and split ways as I head over to the deli. This is when I was approached by 3 taller guys. My fucking stomach hit the ground when I saw the guy's face. It was the ex-boyfriend. I knew instantly from having to stare at his profile picture. And he brought friends. He found me. He quickly grabbed my shoulder tightly and looked me in the eyes. I stared back into his, and they seemed full of rage and insanity. "I finally found you," he said. In probably the most calm voice, he continued to whisper, "You know what I have to do to you now. I am a man of my word." Every inch on my goddamn body began to crawl. Fight or flight was kicking in, and time felt on slow-mo. My brain is running 1,000,000 miles per hour. 3 versus 1. Okay, this isn't good, but they can't just kill me here in broad daylight. Do they have a car? Oh God, are they going to kidnap me first? I started to look around for an exit. He then tightened his grip and said, "Nobody is going to save you." That's when I booked it full pedal to the metal. I knocked his grip off of me and watched as three guys tried to grab me, but I was already gone. I ran as fast as I could. Thankfully, I know the area pretty well, so I took off towards the direction of my friend's apartment. They chased after me, screaming full-blown battle cries. I turned the corner, and by the luck of a million gods, somebody was exiting my friend's apartment building, which had a locked from the outside gate. I dashed in and slammed the gate behind me. I watched for about 5 minutes as they searched the nearby area for me, checking in and behind dumpsters. These guys were serious. I feel lucky to even be telling this event right now. This is one crazy motherfucker I hope I never meet again.
Are you awake, baby girl?
Due to my engagement ending, I had to move back in with my alcoholic dad while I saved up to get my own apartment somewhere. My dad and I had a fight, so I decided to go stay at my friend's house that night because I needed a break from the drunken shenanigans at my house. I've known this friend since middle school, but she's always had questionable taste in guys. I figured everything was fine though, since she and her boyfriend have an infant son together. Her boyfriend went out that night with his friends, and my friend and I hung out and played with her son and dog until 11 when we decided to go to sleep. She showed me to the guest room and then went to her room to sleep with the baby. At around 2 a.m., her boyfriend comes home with some friends. I hear them moving around outside my door, and they weren't acting like typical drunk people, so I opened my door a crack and peeped outside. They were shooting up heroin, and by the looks on their faces, they were already pretty tweaked out. My friend's apartment is a 200-year-old house converted into two apartments, so there were no locks on the doors unless you had a skeleton key. My friend has insomnia since her baby is pretty colicky, and they had just gotten to sleep, so I didn't want to wake her. Plus, I'd have to go past the tweakers to get to her. So I decided to just try to sleep and hope they'd leave us be. About 5 minutes later, my door opens and light spills in. These two guys are staring at me from the doorway, giggling. "Are you awake, baby girl?" they asked, and I laid still and tried to keep my breathing slow and even so I'd look asleep. Then someone says something from a different room, so the tweakers leave my doorway to go talk to whoever said something. I quickly shut the door and got an Uber. I climbed out the bedroom window, which was luckily broken and quite easy to get out of. Then I went to my friend's bedroom and knocked on her window and told her what was going on so she and the baby could leave with me. My friend packed a bag and sent the baby with me, but decided to stay home to make sure her boyfriend didn't do anything stupid. The next morning, she told me she had to call the cops on the tweaker's friends because she caught them trying to steal out of her son's piggy bank and they wouldn't leave. So, creepy tweakers, let's not meet.
My first college professor.
When I started college, my university gave me a list of writing classes that were required for freshmen. I didn't get my first choice, but I was intrigued when I got placed in a writing class based on human and civil rights. It was a great class, and I learned a lot and met Chloe, a girl I now consider to be my soul sister. My professor didn't seem too odd at first. He kind of had that hippie vibe to him and was very passionate about human and civil rights. He was also head of the political science department at the university. When we first got together, he boasted about how excited he was to have a class that consisted of all women. I didn't find it inherently off-putting. I thought it was cool that he was excited, but my friend and I later analyzed a lot of the things he said and did in a different way. As time went on, I got closer to Chloe. Her and I would get coffee and discuss the reading material frequently, which eventually branched out to partying and hanging out as well. She used to joke that our professor liked us the most because we were the loudmouths of the class, in the sense that we were always the ones talking during discussions. That, combined with him praising our 100% female class, were not huge red flags for me at the time. The largest event that kind of bothers me now is the trip up to his cabin in the mountains. He had asked us to accompany him as a class to his cabin, almost an hour and a half away from the university in the mountains. We thought it was a bit odd, some of us at least. He brought food up and I cooked us a large lunch, and it was actually kind of nice to just have a candid conversation with the girls. And my professor brought his wife, so it didn't seem that weird. However, he remained kind of touchy with us. Nothing major, just resting hands on our shoulders while talking to us or trying to get by us. I ended the semester and left that university after finals. I realized that my university didn't have the program I wanted, so I transferred my credits and started going to another school. My friend was dismayed, but we still hung out and did our work together, and she even took another class with him. She said she took him on as an academic advisor and worked more closely with him. Again, no immediate red flags from her. That was until she texted me one day asking if I'd heard the news about him. Since I didn't go there anymore, I was amazingly unaware. Our professor had been forced to resign, and it was in the local news as the university was getting ripped to shreds for handling the situation so poorly. Apparently, there was a convention or event, and the school's political science department went. The president was a female, and I guess he had asked her to meet him at his hotel room to discuss the next day's itinerary. When she showed up, he apparently was not fully dressed and invited her to wait while he finished getting ready for dinner. She hesitantly agreed, and as he dressed, he apparently told her that he loved her in the same way he loved his wife and wanted to be with them both because she was his soulmate. I'm not sure if his wife was in on it or what, but the student immediately reported the incident. Unfortunately, the university offered her a sabbatical, basically asking her to leave the university. Apparently, the professor didn't even deny his behavior in a hearing with university officials. My friend and I got together, and suddenly all of his private meetings with her and I, inviting a group of girls to his cabin in the mountains, seemed a bit off-putting. I've always found myself to be a very paranoid person, and as I got older, I tried to shed those thinking habits. But now, I wish I'd paid more attention and maybe been able to intervene and say something before this poor girl was essentially booted out of school in order to protect its reputation.
A unique shop visit.
I live in a very rural place in the UK. Everyone there knows everyone else as there's only like 200 people living there, and most are either family or family friends. Anyone you don't know personally, you still see regularly, so fairly rural. When I was around 9, I first learned how to ride a bicycle. I would bike around for hours after primary school when I learned fully. At this time, it was around October, so the days were slowly getting shorter. There was a letter going out to all of the parents from my school talking about a black Mercedes driving around that's been offering to take kids home. Obviously, this put everyone into panic mode. There are only around 50 students at my school, so everyone's parents looked out for each other. Well, I went out for one of my little bike adventures at around 6 p.m. as I had finished my dinner. I went down the road towards my local shop, which is only around 50 feet away from my house. I see this black car pull up near the shop and against me. He parks for a few seconds and I run into the shop to stay out of sight. This man, about in his 30s, he had a shaved head and was wearing a sort of ripped Adidas hoodie. That's all I remember. And while I picked up a chocolate bar, he came up next to me and picked up the same chocolate bar. And when I went up to the counter, he told the shop owner that he was paying for me and put £1.50 on the counter. The chocolate is 60 pence each. Well, luckily, the shop owner knows my mum and dad, so asked if I was going upstairs to see her son and play with him on the Xbox. She didn't have a son, but I got the idea. So I said yes and turned to the left and walked towards the door which enters to her part of the shop, which is her house. I went through but looked through the small window by peeking. The guy loitered around for a bit. I could make out what he was saying barely. The shop owner kept asking if he was leaving as it's closing time, and he said, "I'm waiting for my son." She said she would drop me off. He got a bit aggressive and stormed out. I'm not sure if the guy was ever arrested or if anything happened to him. He may have just moved village to the next targets. All I can say is I safely biked home about 20 minutes after, and I rushed into my house and told my mom. Edit 1. After bringing this up once again, I tried to find anything online that could be given to show you all. Unfortunately, due to the nature of where I live, I couldn't find anything. If I do more research and find any news articles or such, or even old booklets we get around my village each month from the year 2009, I'll let you know.
Unknowingly saved my coworker's life.
I work at a grocery store and we close at 12. I usually get the closing shift and someone leaves around 11:30, leaving just me and the manager. I'm working with my friend Carol, who is a really petite girl. She's about 5 foot and probably 90 pounds. At about 11 p.m., two drunk dudes come in with a weird accent and start talking to her. I was on register and barely heard their conversation, but I heard one of them asking when she gets off. A little bit after talking to her some more, I see them get visibly frustrated and leave. We thought nothing of it. We deal with a lot of drunks and angry people all of the time, so it was nothing out of the ordinary. Eventually, it was around 11:30, so she clocked out but had some shopping to do, which she finished around 11:50. I told her she might as well wait for us to clock out, 'cause it will only be 10 minutes anyways. I should mention now that I've been called intimidating numerous times, mostly because I have really broad shoulders, which makes me look way bigger than I am, and I have constant bitch face, which makes it look like I'm pissed all the time. Also, my manager is pretty intimidating. He's a big dude. He kind of looks like Brock Lesnar if he grew out his hair and gained a couple of pounds. So a pretty burly, intimidating looking dude. Anyways, we all walk out together just talking shit to each other when we see two dudes run from out of a corner straight to their truck. One guy was holding what looked to be a bat, and the other guy had some sort of towel. Couldn't see 'cause it was pretty dark. My manager took out his phone and got a pic of the license plate before they drove away. Carol realized right away that it was the guys that were talking to her. This is when she explained to us that they kept asking when she was off and if she was free. She slipped up and said she didn't have a boyfriend, so they most likely waited outside that entire time for her to come out, but got scared when they seen two other scary looking guys with her. It's crazy to think that if she would have left when she was planning to, that she could have been seriously hurt. Or even worse,
A lesson for wannabe criminals.
I have always been a lanky and unmuscular man. Needless to say, when I came face to face with a big dude holding a knife in the middle of the night, I was pretty much fucked. I was walking home from my closing shift on a warm summer night last year when he stepped out of the shadows and demanded my wallet. I didn't immediately reach for it. I guess I was in shock, and he stepped closer and yelled at me to empty my pockets. When the realization set in that this guy was ready to kill me over the meager $20 I had on me, a white moth fluttered between us. To my surprise, the mugger began screaming and swinging his knife at the bug, which only caused it to fly around more sporadically. Those fierce eyes which had been looking at me just a few seconds ago were now shrouded in terror and not breaking their focus on the moth. I took karate lessons for a few years when I was a young boy, so I took advantage of the large man desperately flailing at a small insect and performed the number one move recommended by all reputable martial arts schools. I ran like hell. I ran all the way home, occasionally glancing behind myself, but I never saw him following. He had other matters to attend to, I suppose. So a lesson for all wannabe criminals. Before attempting to commit a crime, go see a therapist for help getting over your dumb phobias.
Let's kill this guy, bury his body in the woods, take all of his money, and run off together.
So I am a waitress at a pretty small village pub. It's really chill and we don't get a lot of customers, so I am usually the only server slash bartender. The only really busy day is Sunday around noon, so my boss stays with me to help with the lunch rush. Last Sunday was pretty calm and manageable. I was taking care of the customers in the main room and garden, while my boss was taking care of two large parties in a separate dining hall. Since it is a small village pub in a rural area, I know almost all of our customers, so that one guy really stood out because I've never seen him before. He was probably in his late 40s, smelled terrible, and had extremely greasy hair. He was just standing at the bar, drinking beer and talking to a man who is a regular and comes in every day. The weird guy was constantly staring at me with wide eyes, biting his nails, which was already creepy as fuck. I overheard him saying stuff like, "Wow, she is such a doll. Unbelievable." Or, "I wish she would wear a mini skirt to work." To the other customer, that made me pretty uncomfortable, but still, it happens every day since I am an 18-year-old girl and most of my customers are 40-plus-year-old men. About an hour later, my area was pretty empty, and the creepy guy was the only one left at the bar. He was still staring at me and biting his nails. My boss was standing at the other end of the bar with one of his customers who was paying a pretty large bill, and when the customer opened his wallet, you could see a bunch of €100 notes in there. The creepy guy mumbled something in my direction, and I said, "I'm sorry, what was that?" He was waving me to get closer, so I did, and he mumbled very quietly, "Hey, I have a great idea." I said, "Oh yes, what's that?" He nodded towards the customer paying his bill and mumbled, "We could kill this guy, bury his body in the woods, take all of his money, and run off together." I thought that was some kind of odd joke and awkwardly tried to laugh, but the guy didn't laugh or smile or anything. I just kind of stuttered, "Oh no, I don't think that's a good idea." He still wasn't smiling or laughing, so I just noped the fuck out of there and started to do some work in the back until the guy was gone. I am used to creeps, but that was some next level shit, and I still don't know if he was trying to make a joke or if he actually meant it.
Grabbed on the subway.
Context: I'm a 210-pound man who is 6'1". One night, not too long ago, about 3 a.m., I was waiting for the subway to take me back to Manhattan. I was the only one on the platform, or at least I thought I was. I walked down to the end of the subway platform and sat on one of the old benches, looking down at my phone and listening to music. I hadn't realized someone else had not only entered the subway station, but was standing right over me. I looked up to see a very well-dressed man in an expensive-looking fitted suit with a total blank stare. I sat there frozen, having never experienced anything like this. He then grabbed my leg and said, "Let's fool around while we wait for the train." I immediately stood up and started backing away, only I had begun backing myself into the wall by the subway tunnel. I had nowhere to go. The well-dressed, dead-eye man was closing in on me, and without even thinking about it, I put my hands on his shoulders and pushed him as hard as I could. I felt his body completely collapse under my push, almost like I folded him in half. Then I heard his head slam on the concrete ground of the platform, and he laid there totally motionless. I was convinced at this time the man was dead. I ran up to the subway entrance to see if any cops were hanging out up there as they usually do, but there was none. I returned to the platform to find the man pulling himself up and getting onto the bench I was sitting at earlier. I was relieved he wasn't dead, but I hope he learned his lesson. I then took an Uber home instead of the subway. So, well-dressed, dead-eyed guy, let's not meet.
The dirt road that almost took my life.
Context: I grew up my entire childhood without a father. When I turned 15, I got really into hunting and just enjoyed guns in general. My uncle is an avid hunter, gun builder, and ammunition reloader. He loves to hunt. This was a common interest that made us become very close. He was my father figure and taught me a lot that made me the man that I am today. Now to the story. My uncle's father lives in Montana, which allowed us to get resident pricing on big game hunting tags. Once a year, we would head up to his property and hunt for a week. Usually, this would go off without a hitch, and if we were lucky, we would get the shot we were looking for. Unfortunately, not this year. Just like every year, we headed up to his father's property in northern Montana. That night, we headed out to go set up some hunting cameras so that we knew that there were deer in the area, so we knew it was a good place to hunt. It must have been 1 a.m., and we were driving down this 2-lane dirt road, headed into the woods. We were always the only people on the road since it was so early in the morning. This particular time we saw headlights approaching from behind us, but thought nothing of it. We figured they must be doing the same thing as us. After tailing us for some time, the headlights disappeared, which was strange since there were no turns on this particular road. A few seconds go by, and all of a sudden we see the truck driving on the shoulder to our right with the lights off. The shoulder was a small hill with brush and a fence fairly close to it. Definitely something that nobody should be driving on. The truck speeds up and gets back on the road, turns its lights back on, and speeds off into the darkness. This set off some red flags, but we figured they were just impatient and wanted to get there before us. No big deal, or so we thought. We drove down the road for a few more miles until we saw taillights stopped in the middle of the road. It was the truck that passed us a few miles back. They had set up traffic cones to completely block off the road, and there was another truck parked on the shoulder. We figured that they must have broken down, so we stopped. I read an article online earlier this year about people in other countries that would make roadblocks to rob and kill people for their vehicles and belongings. I laughed and started to tell my uncle about this article when 2 men from each truck jumped out of their vehicles and started to approach ours. My uncle always kept 2 handguns on shoulder holsters under his arms when we were out doing these kinds of things. This saved our lives. 2 of the men stayed at the tailgate of the truck parked on the road, and the other 2 men came up to his window. At this point, my uncle has his right hand in his jacket with his hand holding the gun. The men were extremely friendly and said that the truck on the shoulder had broken down and they were just helping out. They asked my uncle if he knew anything about cars and if he could come take a look at the problem. My uncle refused, and this made the men angry. Both instantly drew pistols, and one of the men rounded the front of the truck towards my window. My uncle grabbed the man's gun that was pointed at him, which he forgot to load a round into. Luckily for us, my uncle pulled his gun out and shot the man in the shoulder and slammed on the gas, driving on the left shoulder past all of the men. I looked back and could see the other 3 men gathering around the man my uncle shot. We drove and drove and drove for what seemed like an eternity without saying a word to each other. We drove back to his dad's house and he told me to go to bed. He called the police and told them what had happened. They sent out 2 officers to the house to take his statement and mentioned to him that they had had quite a few reports of roadblocks being set up all around northern Montana. They were able to catch all 4 of the men who stopped us that night when they took the man who was shot to the hospital.
Guy pretending my dog was his.
Just for the record, this is my first post, so apologies in advance for mess ups. This happened when I was about 5 years old. I have 6 siblings, big fat Greek family, and we lived in a normal, safe suburban area in the Midwest. My mom had always drilled it into my head and my siblings' heads not to talk to strangers, especially adult strangers. She would always say, if an adult is ever asking anything from a child, something is wrong. I played outside with my older sister. She would have been 7. Our house was on a corner, so we had the main road and then the road leading into the neighborhood. We had just got our first family dog. She was a beagle, so she was tiny, and we had her tied up to one of our trees. I remember being by the puppy and playing with her by myself for a little bit. At that point, she was only about a month or 2 old. A gold sedan pulled up along the road leading into the neighborhood, and a grown man got out, probably in his 30s. He called out to me, and it went like this. Man, hey, that's my dog. Me. No, it's not. This is our dog. Her name is Corky. Man. No, really. That's my dog. I lost her and I've been looking everywhere for her. Come here, I have a picture of my dog I'll show you, and you can see that it's mine. I distinctly remember taking 2 steps forward, and then all sorts of alarms started going off, and I couldn't say anything. At this point, my sister had noticed and came over and was standing beside me as I was just shaking my head no to the man. My brother had been in charge of babysitting my sister and I, and must have heard the conversation from inside, because he ran outside and started yelling at the guy asking if there was a fucking problem. At that point, the man got in his car real quick and sped off. I always wonder how different my life would be today had I been too naive of what horrible things adults are capable of. So I'm super grateful to my big brother who saved my ass, and to my mom who made me paranoid, and for good reason. So, Creepy guy pretending that my dog is yours? I'll give you props for creativity, but I sincerely hope we never meet again and that you rot in hell.
Mysterious dude with no face.
So it happened at the beginning of summer 2017 at 3 a.m. One night I went drinking at a friend's house. Long story short, 3 people in a small bed was nothing short of annoying, so I told them that I would just walk home instead of staying over, as it wasn't that far anyway. I left my car there with the intention of picking it up the following day. I'd settled with putting regular clothes over my PJs for the trip because I was lazy, drunk, and it was chilly out at that time of night. Ready, I left the house and started walking. On the very first street, I crossed a man walking in the opposite direction. Wanting to see if he had gone on his way, I looked back and saw him standing there on the other side of the street, looking straight at me. I got chills down my spine and tried not to let my imagination run wild as I continued on. Suddenly, I heard steps behind me. I glanced back and saw that the man was a few feet behind me, now walking in the same direction and on my side of the street. I began to freak out, but I was reaching a big street with a lot of lights and thought I would soon be in the clear. Every time I'd look back, I couldn't see his face, as they were obscured by a baseball cap and hood. I was yearning for him to show me his face, smile, and say, "I'm not following you. We're just on the same path." That didn't happen. Still panicking, I decide to cross the street to gain some distance between us. Because of this, I ultimately had to cross the street again and then pass in front of him to get to my street. I decided to enter 911 on my phone without actually making the call, just in case. I was still trying to convince myself that he wasn't stalking me. If he were still following me when I got to my street, I'd go through with the call. So I crossed the street again, passing in front of him at a distance, and got to my street. I used the opportunity of the cover of the buildings to jog ahead, but stopped short, not wanting him to see me hurrying away. If he'd started chasing at a run, I would come out the loser. Again, steps sounded behind me. It was him. I went through with the 911 call just to talk to someone and maybe gain some sense of security until I got home. The agent on the phone asked me if I wanted the police to assist. I said no, that maybe this was all paranoia, and I just needed to talk to someone till I got home. He asked me if I was on 8th Avenue, and I answered that yes, I was. Damn, that felt good. My cell location had given him the clue. So then the agent asked me to describe the man that was following me. Dark blue jeans, black shoes, a gray hoodie zipped all the way up, and a black baseball cap that hid his face. Arriving at my apartment building, I dashed inside and secured the lock. I thanked the agent on the phone, telling him that I was home safe and heading down toward my apartment. Looking back to the front door one more time to see if everything was okay, I saw the man peering in, likely watching to see which apartment I was about to enter. I freaked out. I asked the 911 agent to send the police now. When the stalker saw me looking at him, he pulled away, crossing the street to sit on a bench in front of my building. I was so afraid to go into my apartment, not wanting him to know where I lived, especially since I was in the basement and my windows were street level. But I couldn't just stand in the hallway until morning, so I went into my apartment, not turning on any lights, and discreetly closed all my curtains. I was shaking. Looking out, I saw the police spot the man and then begin talking to him. Searching him, they then escorted him to their car and took him away. I went to my bed in shock. After a while, I nudged the curtains open again. All I could see was the empty bench the man had been sitting on. I didn't really sleep that night. I thought of everything that could have happened to me if I hadn't contacted the police and had instead just faked talking to someone, like most people do. I'm from Canada, and here the police can't arrest someone unless he's been in possession of a weapon or was in the process of breaking his parole. So yeah, mysterious dude with no face. Let's not meet again.
The man following me in Walmart.
This was a couple years ago when I had just moved back to the city I grew up in. I was separated from my husband and about to start the divorce process, so I was still getting used to this single mom thing. I had to go to Walmart one day and had no choice but to take my 5-year-old and 1-year-old daughters along. I was pretty distracted dealing with my 5-year-old, who at the time loved running too far away from me in the store. Thankfully, this isn't a story where she was snatched, but I had noticed a man in the same aisles as us for a while, which I brushed off as a coincidence. We got to the candy aisle and was looking at something on the shelf. When I turned around, the man was right behind me, like his face was probably in my hair. Still, I wanted to believe the best and said I'm sorry as I assumed I was in his way. I noticed someone with a walkie-talkie tell him to come with him. Still being naive, I assumed he was stealing. I paid for my items and went to leave when I was stopped by loss prevention/security and asked to come with them, which was scary and embarrassing. I knew I hadn't stolen anything, so I assumed my kids had pocketed something. The person who pulled me into the room said, "You're not in any trouble, but I really think you need to know what was going on. Did you notice the man following you?" I said, "Yeah, I saw someone near us, but I assumed it was a coincidence." They asked to make sure I didn't know the man and it wasn't some weird sex thing. Then they informed me the man had been following me and my kids around, masturbating. They didn't know why me or if he was interested in me or my girls. I was horrified. They informed me the man had been banned from the store, and they walked me to my car to make sure we left safely. I don't know why they didn't call the police, and in hindsight, I should have. I was just so freaked out and wanted to get me and my kids home safely. So, to the man masturbating behind me in Walmart, let's not meet.
The robed man.
So this happened in 2013. I was returning from basketball practice. At the time, the practices were held pretty late for a 7th grader, around 10 p.m., meaning we would finish around 11:30. I would also add that it was a snowless winter, meaning cold wind, darkness, and dead trees dominating the streets, which made an even creepier atmosphere in the small town I live. I was entering my neighborhood at a dimly lit intersection with no living soul in sight, not even a stray animal. I looked around into the two dark corners in the intersection because they had always activated my paranoia of being watched. The two corners had no street lights, so complete darkness had been next to me on both sides, which was a fairly uneasy feeling for an easily scared 7th grader. I looked to the right and saw dead leaves and trees and a couple of neighborhood houses. I looked to the right, and apart from the stuff written above, I saw a man. Ordinarily, I would not have been bothered, but he was dressed in a robe and had been standing in the middle of the dark street. I looked, so did he. I started to get that uneasy feeling when you know that something's wrong, when suddenly he raised his arms and started dashing towards me. I was frightened, and I ran so fast like never before in my entire life. When I rushed my way to the next intersection close by my house, I had turned around to see the man gone. He had disappeared, and shortly after I have entered the safety of my home. It has been a few years. I stopped playing basketball, but I am going to my friend's home gym at roughly the same time, around 10 p.m., and I always get scared whenever I approach that intersection in fear of seeing him again. So, robe dude, let's not meet. Also, this happened in Serbia if anyone is interested.
Are you here all by yourself?
This was years ago and I was just a kid, probably around 8, 9, or 10, old enough to walk across the street to the market alone. We had had a townhouse less than a block away from the grocery store, so if I ever got $1 or something, I'd walk over there to get candy. I walked over to the store as usual, perusing the aisles, seeing what I want to get, and I noticed this man looking at me. Not a big deal, but he just creeped me out from the jump. I grab my stuff and get ready to check out. Guess who ends up checking out right behind me? The same dude. Even as a kid, my instincts were telling me danger. He tries to make small talk in line and asks, "So, are you here all by yourself?" I mumble yes, not wanting to be rude, but that kind of weirded me out too. So I finish paying and I know the man will be following shortly, so I decide not to start walking home until he leaves. He comes out, sees me, and goes on his way. I watch him get into his car, but then he keeps doing laps around the parking lot slowly, as if he's waiting for me to walk. This was in the late 90s, before cell phones were anywhere, so I ducked inside and asked one of the grocery store workers if I could use the phone so I could call my mom to pick me up. I also tell the worker why, so she grabs one of the guys and we all walk out so I can point him out. When he sees us, he takes off. My mom ends up coming and picking me up, and it's pretty anticlimactic, but that's the end of the story. I remember this so well because as an adult, I'm sort of impressed with my young self, toots own horn, for being so aware of my surroundings. Anyhow, creepy grocery store man, let's not meet.
The prison guard who would appear in the least expected places.
Hi everyone, long time lurker, first time poster. I've thought about sharing this story several times, and I'm finally getting around to it. This is going to be sort of long, so I apologize in advance. This takes place when I was about 10 to 12 years old, 2-year age gap because it occurred over about a year and a half. When my mom would pick me up after school, we would occasionally stop at a gas station or the Walgreens down the street and pick up a snack. So, on this particular day, we pulled up to the Walgreens and waited in the car while my mom finished up a phone call. As we're about to get out of the car, a small red vehicle pulled up. I'd already whipped open the door on my mom's minivan and was ready to jump out when the driver of the car got out of his vehicle. He was a bigger guy, about 6'3", and heavier set, with gray, balding hair and a beard. He smiled at me when he got out and said, "Well, I didn't notice you two." My mom just turned to him and half-heartedly laughed, and he ended up striking up a conversation with us. The conversation was relatively normal at first, but then turned personal. He noticed my red jacket and goes, "Oh, you must go to all girls high school academy. I should have known. All you academy girls sure are pretty." I was super confused because one, I was 10 and didn't look old enough to be in high school, And two, my uniform was definitely visible and looked nothing like the ones they wore at the other school. Me, being a dumb 10-year-old, corrected him and said, no, I go to elementary school. I'm only in 4th grade. He just laughed and said, well, you sure look nice and pretty enough to be an academy girl. At this point, I could tell my mom was both annoyed and uncomfortable. He was leaning into the car, blocking my ability to get out. He started telling us how he is a guard for one of the prisons in the city, and how he can be demanding and rough if he needs to be. I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was something along the lines of, all of those tough inmates are terrified of me. I'm a big guy. I could really hurt someone if I need to. My mom ended the conversation around this point, saying we were in a rush, and the creep finally moved from the doorway of our car. We walked into the store, and he got back into his car and just sat there. He never went into the store. My mom started fussing at me for telling him my name, age, and what school I went to, and the stranger danger finally started to settle in. When we left the store, he was gone. Flash forward to about 6 months later, I'm with my mom at a Walmart about 25 minutes away from where our first encounter took place. My mom and I are at the register checking out, and she realized she forgot something. She sent me to go get it, and on my way back to the register, I see the same man stop dead in his tracks and stare at me. Well, hey, Missy. I was wondering when I'd get to see you again. I just stared back at him for a second before mumbling a quick, hey, and walking off to meet my mom. As I'm walking away, I hear him say, under his breath, I need to get around to that one. And when I looked over my shoulder, he was still staring at me. After this encounter, I figured it was just a coincidence. It's a large city, but at the time, we only had 2 or 3 Walmarts, so maybe it was just an accidental run-in. I told my mom about it, and she made me promise that if I ever saw him again, I'd let her know. A year later, I'd all but forgotten about the creepy prison guard. My sister and her husband had been visiting us for about a week, and they were packing up to leave. We followed them to one of the gas stations around the corner from our parents' house, so my parents and sister could get gas. I went in with my mom and sister to get one of those styrofoam ice chests and a couple of other things. I ended up wandering around the small store on my own. It didn't take long before I ran into, you guessed it, creepy prison guard. This time, I was really creeped out. The Walgreens where I first encountered him was across the city, maybe 45 minutes away from my parents' house, and the Walmart was also a good distance away. This gas station was less than a mile away from my house, and it made me severely uncomfortable that this guy who gave me the creeps was so close to my home. He smiled at me, almost like he'd been waiting for me. But before he could talk to me, my mom and sister appeared around the corner. My mom grabbed my hand, told me we needed to check out, and started to walk towards the register. Creepy guy put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You don't have to pay for all that. I have an ice chest in my car. You can come with me to grab it and we'll be right back." Of course, my mom wasn't having it. She kept telling him it was fine, we didn't need it, but he kept insisting, even after we'd paid for everything. He followed us out to our cars and only stopped insisting that I come with him to get his ice chest when he saw my dad and brother-in-law. He tried to strike up a jovial conversation with them and even ended up walking to his car behind the building and grabbing his ice chest. He tossed it into the bed of my brother-in-law's truck, looked at me, and said, "It's always nice running into you, Missy." My mom never told me what came of it, but she called the police and the prison he worked at and filed complaints. Knowing the police force in that area, I'm sure that nothing was done, but it's been nearly 11 years now, and I haven't seen him since that last time at the gas station. So, creepy prison guard who showed too much interest in a 10-year-old girl, let's not meet ever again.